Welcome everybody to this week's OpsTalks. I'm your host, Andre Sanchez. This OpsTalks, of course, presented by Rentley, and I'm really excited for this week's episode. It's a notable first for OpsTalks. It's our first CEO of a publicly traded company, which I'm really excited about. You know, as we all know, connectivity is the backbone of a lot of what we do at Rentley, but also a lot of future tech that's coming out there. In real estate, it's redefining how we interact with our prospective residents, but also too with our real estate operators that Rentley works with. It's revolutionizing IoT and how consumers interact with everyday life. And it's really helping shape the future of self-guided tours for us. But, you know, one of the questions we always get asked is what's next in IoT? And really, you know, how does connectivity shape the future of prop tech? And I'm really happy to have the CEO of Core here, a leader in IoT solutions that powers everything from smart homes to, I believe, even cars and energy efficient buildings. So today we're sitting down with the CEO of Core Wireless. We have Ron Totton here. Ron, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to talk you up a bit because you had a little bit of a hiccup. You had like a power outage you were dealing with, and you were sort of scrambling, but you made it. You made it on OpsTalks.
I made it. The powers above got power back restored within the last hour. We were out for about 30 hours. And I have 3 kids, and schools were canceled, so it's been an exciting. We had dinner with candlelight last night, so exciting.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It speaks to your commitment and really appreciate that. A lot of people would have used it as an out to get out of the OpsTalks, but you made it happen, so appreciate it. Ron, why don't you tell an audience who's unfamiliar with you, tell us a little bit about your position and Core itself.
Sure. So thank you again for the opportunity. Yeah. So I'm the CEO of Core Wireless. Core is a leading IoT solution provider, recognized by people like the Gartner Group to be, a leader in our sector. So we work with our customers to help them build, design, and then scale connected solutions. We offer a variety of different types of connectivity solutions depending on, what our customers' needs are. We're most well known for being a global provider. We are able to provide our customers with multi-carrier solutions, which allows them to have sort of built-in redundancies when there's outages. Not unlike what I just described with the power, but if for whatever reason your connectivity provider has an issue, we have, failover and redundancy built in. And for us, connectivity is a horizontal. So we offer solutions in the industries that you mentioned. We're also very big in connected health. So remote patient monitoring, clinical trials, very big in the COVID times. Unfortunately, now we're in a time where whether it's bird flu or the various others that are happening, and then particularly also where I have a keen interest is around sustainability. So smart meters, agriculture, clean water, sewage. There's wind turbines. There's IoT has tremendous use cases, and so effectively, we're very focused on helping our customers leverage IoT to build new revenue streams, like a great exciting business that you have, as well as some long-standing customers that are using IoT to launch new products or possibly, a way to introduce AI to drive, productivity gains.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we're gonna really drill down on IoT in a bit too. I mean, obviously, I'm biased, working in a sector which touches IoT. I remember, we were working on a white paper talking about the connectivity of buildings and how they could morph the resident experience. And it even feels like, we're not progressing as fast as we could, but that's okay. It leaves a lot of room for a lot of our vision to be executed on. I think there's just so much opportunity for IoT just in general. And we'll geek out on that later. But I wanted to lead into this talk because, it's funny. This is our, 6th or 7th episode. And I kind of caught on a common theme looking at your story is that a lot of the people that we interview and that have seen a lot of tremendous personal success always have like a really interesting story. Meaning it's never this linear path to, as an example, being a CEO. It's like, and I talk to people a lot about this. They think, oh yeah, you just, you go to school to be XYZ and then you just become it. And I'm just curious. You touched on a point. You're no different in the fact that you had started off in your teens. By the way, we had a power outage too. I don't know if you saw that. but you started off in your teens as a hockey player. Is that correct?
Yes. So I was through some unfortunate circumstances left. I'm Canadian, so I was raised in Canada by British parents, and unfortunately, when I was 15, my mom fell ill with cancer, and we moved to Ireland, back to her hometown, which was her wish. And so I spent most of my high school in Ireland. It was actually what's called a grammar school, if anyone follows, sort of UK or Irish. But nonetheless, I had been a hockey player since I learned to skate shortly after I learned how to walk. And I was a pretty, strong player. And I got asked when I moved there to try out for this, professional hockey team, which was in the Premier League, the Scottish Premier League, and then we later played in the English Premier League. So yeah, so you can imagine, as a 16-year-old being asked to play in a professional league, get paid, and get all the free stuff. I thought actually they were kidding, but yeah, so I played professional hockey while going to school. So student during the week, and then sort of professional athlete on weekends, and then of course practices and stuff during the week.
And how long did you continue with the professional hockey?
Yeah, it was almost 3 years, and I got to a point where my mom unfortunately passed away, but my dad had said to me always education first. And of course, at this point, I was enjoying some success, and you come to a natural point where, with some guidance, you got to make some tough decisions. And in that one, it really, well, I would say my dad would have said it wasn't an option. I suppose it was, is really wanting to pursue my education. So being a professional hockey player in a lower tier, nonetheless professional league was great, but I had sort of ambitions and interests for other things. So yeah, but it was a heck of a 3 years. I got to see all around the British Isles, and play against some great talent from a lot of European countries as well.
That's awesome. And so you mentioned your father was pushing you to get educated. You mentioned it was hard. What was the inflection point where you're like, all right, I got to do this? And what was the next step you took?
Yeah. It was natural. I think it was like an off season, and effectively, for me to go to the next level would have been I would have had to leave school. And so that was kind of a major decision point.
So if you were going to go pro, you had to make a decision.
Yeah, I was playing pro, but if I was going to pursue that as my full-time career,
Gotcha.
then I would likely move to Europe and play for, a higher level team. Obviously get paid more, but obviously at that point you'd be picking professional athletics over education. And I think for me that was a natural decision point. And I was a decent student, but I had ambitions that were, and now I wouldn't have told you that where I sit today, this is what I thought possible. And that's what's great. Dreams can come true. But
Right.
I always had an interest in economics, always had an interest in money and currencies and businesses. And so, yeah, I decided that at that inflection point that I wanted to kind of pursue education. The story is actually I'm the first in my family tree to attend and graduate from university. So I was also going down a different path.
Me too.
Than those.
Me and you share that common bond, that common thread.
Yeah.
And the parents with the guilt of the education, right? Education will set you free. We share that commonality.
Oh, and it's so true. It's so
I didn't
true.
play professional anything though, but no, that's incredible. And then that journey set you off to eventually, and from my understanding too, you were at a company and you actually were at an inflection point in that company where it became public. You were the VP of sales there. Tell us a little bit about that company and how you landed there.
Yeah, so I worked at a company called Descartes Systems, and Descartes had gone public.
Were you there before it went public and you saw that transition?
I was there just after it went public on the first exchange. So it went public on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and then it later, 2 years later, went public on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange.
So you saw it go public in Canada, then public in the US.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, and so, this is all around, date myself here, Y2K, for anyone that remembers what that was all about.
Pets.com. The Pets.com era.
and the rise of the dot-com,
Yep.
businesses, of which,
Mm-hmm.
many unfortunately didn't survive. But yeah, and then of course we were, fortunate, at that point in time, our market cap would have gone from, a couple 100 million to a couple billion, over a relatively short period of time. And our business grew from, sort of circa 40 million to north of 150 million in a relatively short period of time. So yeah, that was definitely exciting. We saw the rise, but then with many companies that were public, we also had a significant fall. I'm happy to report that a recovery took place and the business actually thrives today. Again, still a public company, multi-billion-dollar market cap, and yeah, great point in time in my career for sure.
That's awesome.
Interesting your thread, by the way. I think those early points in time in your career and decisions that you make really can be, like for me, going back there even still is an inflection point, right? Where you decide your future, you make an active decision in your future, and you're grabbing control of your life and chasing whatever you're chasing. And to me, to this day, what I learned back then, when you made the decision for yourself
Mm-hmm.
with a goal and a desire when you maybe had another option, that certainly sticks with me, right?
Yeah, and it's funny when you're in the moment in those decisions, you don't really feel like you're in control, right? Like going back,
Totally.
you're like you almost feel like you're being thrown into a decision, but now that you think back on those moments, you probably look at it with some form of pride, right? Like, hey, I actually was smart enough at that time to make what was probably, a better decision
Yeah.
than maybe some of the other options out
And I
there.
can tell you, my kids ask me about this stuff all the time. But like, for example, when I made that decision, when I went to university, I went back to Canada on my own. I took all these huge student loans. So I could have been playing the sport that I loved, getting paid for it. Meanwhile, I'm taking out these huge loans to go to school, struggling at school because I started working, bartending while going to school, while doing a varsity sport. And then I came out of school with all this huge debt. And you know what? I had it gone within the first 2 years. So it's just funny, but you never know how it's going to work. But I do think if you're chasing your dreams and you give things 150%, it's amazing what you can do. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on one of the points you'd referenced. I'm just curious, like, what were the things that you learned, that kind of got ingrained in you through that IPO process when going from the Canada Stock Exchange to now the US Stock Exchange?
For me, when you think about being in my first experience being in a public company, really what I learned is how important it is to meet your commitments. Like the people, you could talk about the quarterly grind, and yeah, it is a bit of a grind, but the ability to forecast, the ability to drive the results, and be super disciplined with your time. So for example, you really had to have a strong understanding of your value proposition to your customer such that you could then adequately forecast it. So again, the stronger the value proposition, the stronger the compelling event, the more accuracy you could have around forecasting. So, winning is one thing, but then having to win and be able to predict it and meet certain, targets consistently kind of quarter over quarter. So, to me, I think more about the operational learnings than necessarily the go public learnings. And partially because my job at the time was to really make sure that we delivered to the commitments that we made. And so I lived in a very much an operational world that was, day to day, week to week, and particularly you were measured by the quarter. So yeah.
Like being on a stop clock, right? It's like, all right, like in hockey, right? You got to get the goal by the end of that 90 minutes. You have to, and it's funny, like week over week, quarter over quarter, you have to deliver, right? You can't fall short, and you have to find out how you can do that.
I think honestly, that reference that you just made, I do think that has allowed me to really, I'll say, perform not well, but consistently under pressure. So, and so when I think if you've been in a sport, or you've been in a part of your career or an interest that does have some things like you got to get things within a certain time frame, or I think it does, it translates. I also think it really forces you to be disciplined on the process, right? So it doesn't sound sexy, but you know, for you to perform as an athlete, there's so much work that goes into the performance that isn't the flashy bit that you see
Oh
on the
my God.
TV or the
100%.
result.
Yep.
And I think the business is the same, like the deal closing is actually, in some cases, the end of a whole bunch of process, or in some cases, it's just the start of a big process. And so I think then there's things you learn, but being disciplined, putting in the work, being prepared, I think is something you learn about. How you handle setbacks. There's no pity party, for you, and you got to take, and also a little bit of be ready for anything. And I think one big thing is, and I know mindfulness is much more of a topic now than it would have been, back in the dot-com eras, is really being in the present moment and living in the present moment, and not getting too caught up with the pressure, the expectations. Because if you're living in the present moment, you are in the now. You're not worrying about tomorrow or next week. And I think that ultimately leads to really good execution.
And it's funny you say that because there's definitely parallels between business and sports in that regard. I consistently try to tell myself and my team, it's all about the fundamentals. I think if you really take a sport seriously, one of the things you routinely do is you're not going for the World Cup. You're not really managing sophisticated playbooks. If you're going to go there, though, you have to master the fundamentals. Like I had the honor of teaching some kids soccer for the first time. By the way, knew nothing about soccer. And one thing I saw consistently, which is kind of reflective of in some areas of work, is you see people. I would see this. My kid, particularly, my son's a showboater, right? Loves Pele, loves like the soccer greats, Messi, and he'd consistently try to do slide tackles. And he'd consistently, the first couple practices, he'd consistently try to do these fancy plays. And a lot of the kids they're 6, right? What are you going to do? When you start ingraining the fundamentals, hey, just kick the ball consistently for 10 minutes, just dribble. You tend to see, now they were 6-year-olds, so they weren't doing great, but every time the practice was focused on the fundamentals, they always did better. And I kind of laugh at that because it's kind of similar to what you're saying. If you're routine enough on the fundamental things that you have to do, then the winning is almost ancillary to that, right? If you know you're doing your follow-ups, if you know you're doing your checks, if you know you're developing great product, if you know you're doing the right things fundamentally every day consistently, it almost lends to the result.
Yeah, no, for sure. What makes it a little bit harder, and I would assume this would be the case in your business as well, is if you're in a professional sport or you're in a job where there's a trailblazer before you, it's much more defined. When you're doing things that haven't been done before, or growing to a level that hasn't been done, or at the rate is there's maybe not that playbook that maybe there might be in the case of your sporting on the fundamentals. But at the same time, you know I do believe that what gets you there in many cases does keep you there, even though there's the saying that what gets you there might not keep you there. I've learned in business, actually, most of the time it's absolutely the case. But you need to have measurements, and you need to have outside views to help make sure that you don't get you don't become the frog in the boiling water, because you're so into the present that you can't see your surroundings. And that's where great advisors, where I always big believer in listen to your customer. And you can't really, you don't, not usually too far off when you're listening to your customer.
You make a great point, and I think a lot of our viewers too are in prop tech or in tech. Like sometimes you really have to be regimented about defining your fundamentals, right? If you're in a green shoot area or growth sector that's not well defined, right? Because it's routine in hockey, it's routine in soccer, it's routine in basketball. You know what those fundamentals are, but a big part of business and leadership, especially if you're in a new sector or you're doing something completely new, is really understanding what your fundamentals should be, right? And a lot of the time you can rely on best practices, but sometimes you need to define them, right? Like you
Oh, for
sort of
sure.
need to know, like, okay, like this is the fundamental thing I'm going to focus on that is a part of the business. So that's really fascinating. I really want to spend some time talking about IoT. I'm a huge Apple fan. I've been a huge Apple fan since like 95 when Gil Amelio was like at the helm and they were bleeding money left and right. I don't know if you remember those days. They still had the rainbow
Yes.
logo. And I was a huge Apple fan. I think this is when they had 2% market share and like nobody used Apple products. And I remember kids used to laugh at me like, oh, you don't have a real computer. You have a Mac and that's different. And I remember I went to Cupertino and I got my iMac shirt with, the turquoise Mac on it. And that's I mean, we could probably spend an hour talking about that .com area, but for me, that was a magical time because that was my first exposure to the computer, and obviously the internet was coming of age. I remember I got my first iPod. I thought it was so cool because I'd cruise around campus with my white earphones. I mention it because you had briefly spent, from my understanding, some time on the Apple campus
Yes.
in Cupertino, I assume. Any fun anecdotes or stories that you could share? Did you run into Tim Cook or Steve in the hallway, or any fun anecdote there?
Well, not Steve Jobs, but I do have a pretty cool one. So, well, first of all, the one thing is that we were a supply chain software company that was pitching to Apple. Yeah, at Descartes, and we were pitching to Apple. And what's interesting about this story is we were informed that we had lost. And so we still have several colleagues that to this day, 25 years later, you mention Apple and you see these big smiles and the story of, having been told that you were lost and then later take a series of actions to turn it around. Ultimately, we're successful. That was great.
You lost the deal and then you turned it around?
We lost the deal and then we were able to turn it around.
How'd you turn it around? Tell me, that's fantastic.
Well, I think it's the short answer would be we were competing with a company that wasn't playing straight up. And we're a newcomer, and they were showing a lot of product that was still really beta, although they were presenting it as if it was really generally available. They had done a lot of mock-ups of screens and a lot of different things, and we chose to not sell against our competitor, that we were really focused on the customer, and we didn't also want to play sort of the throwing mud at our competitor. When we lost, I asked to get a meeting with one of the senior vice presidents there, and of course they declined, and I had to call him personally and say, listen, I think you're making a big mistake. Give me 5 minutes. And so I went in, spent some time, and encouraged them to go and look at some areas, and they did, and ultimately, our competitor, some of what they were doing became common knowledge, and the customer came back. And I think where we gained a lot of respect was we actually didn't share that information until kind of after the fact, where they seen that we were like, not just because we wanted to win, we didn't want to see them make a mistake. So that's probably one. But the more interesting thing is when we were on the campus at Apple, this was probably for 4 or 5 months, security was nuts. And we always used to think like, why, like, and even the Apple employees were saying there must be something really big going on because it's not normally like this. You'd get escorted to the bathroom, you get stopped in the hallway, and you'd be asked, where you were going or where you were coming from, and taken back to security to make sure you had signed in properly and all that kind of thing. And ultimately, it turned out that this was when the iPod was being created. So this was before it had been launched. And so, yeah, but probably the biggest claim to fame about this whole situation was Tim Cook was the one who signed our contract.
Nice.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You have a Tim Cook signature somewhere? Did you get
we have? Yes, not framed up here, but yes, we do. So,
well, I think first of all, it's a great story. And I think too, like the nugget there is, and this is tempting for anyone who works in any sales or business capacities. You want to sell the sizzle, not the steak, right? And a lot of the time too, being trustworthy and honest in business, you have to make sure that you're selling the steak. And it's tempting to do the sizzle. I think if you're going to do the sizzle, you got to position, right? You got to say, hey, like this is something we're working on, but it's you set expectations with the customer, right? And I think that's super important. And I think, kind of to your point, probably the longest lasting customer relationships I've ever had, whether at Rentley or other companies, has always been one based on trust, right? Like they know,
Sure.
hey, if we're not delivering, we know we're going to fix it, and we say we will, and we execute on it, right? Or hey, if they're happy with the product, they'll tell you too. It's that trustworthiness between a vendor and a client that's really key. That's why we call them partners, right? I mean, I tend to refer to my biggest clients as partners because it really is it's kind of like a marriage, right? You got to trust each other to deliver and execute. You can't do that if you're just sharing fake PowerPoints and fake news.
For sure. And I'm also a big believer in, even though I'm, extremely competitive, I still believe you got to play by the rules, and play fair within the rules. But yeah, it's ultimately all about trust, and it takes a lot to earn it, and unfortunately can be broken very quickly if you're not careful. So your word is, means a lot. And yeah. And so not saying anything to get the deal, not saying what you think people want to hear, but being truthful and honest, and forthright, super important.
We haven't spent too much time talking about IoT, so let's chat about the
Sure.
Internet of Things, IoT, and connectivity. I would say we've been working in the IoT space for almost 10 years, which is pretty exciting. We started in 2015 working in the IoT space with regards to self-guided touring and smart home. There's a couple story points there. One is like some things change, some things don't. I remember I kind of laugh about this with American Clark. I remember the funny thing about IoT is there's always kind of this protocol talk every couple of years, like, oh, this new big protocol is going to change everything. And what I've come to learn is that it's not so much about the technology, it's really about the application of the technology, right? And that's why I really like IoT, because when you see it applied right, it really helps benefit people. And Core is obviously a really influential player in smart home. What is exciting to you about IoT? You sort of mentioned it at the top of the call, but what are you like really excited about?
Well, I think probably most excited about is probably on the application side, meaning like applying IoT. So to me, 35% or so of Core's revenues are in what we call connected health. And in this case, we're talking about using enabling technology like IoT to save lives, improve the quality of life, and or help solve situations like like we went through with COVID. So so to me, when you think about even a situation where someone is even terminally ill, and to be able to spend their time at home versus living in a hospital, their quality of life being significantly improved. Or for on a maybe slightly more upbeat case, people being able to live with dialysis machines and or to have remote patient monitoring around critical care, such that you're able to move on. Or I think the great one are the insulin pumps, and you'll see young kids in participating in sports we were talking about. They've got a little tracker, which is checking their vitals. That information is going over the cellular network into the cloud, into some application somewhere, and there could be a message that triggers to the pump to release a certain amount of insulin, for example. So great IoT use case where in this case, and we have friends that have a young child that is, has severe diabetes, and sometimes this pump will go off in the middle of the night because some of the vitals have gotten a little bit tricky. So to me, I think that one I'm really excited about, because I think improving the quality of life or saving lives. I mean, of course, our customers do that. We don't provide this directly to patients or people. We provide it to our customers, and I won't mention names, but where they provide that end service. So to me that one's exciting. I think the other one, if I think about application, is anything that relates to the planet. So fresh water, sewage, wind, solar. So a lot of the sustainability type solutions can be enabled by IoT. So could be crops, as I said, it could be sewage, fresh water, I mean, even lighting in buildings, solar, etc.
Energy efficiency absolutely is huge in IoT. Like it's a huge application. I think you sort of focus on that. I don't know if you're like me, but when you have kids, you start thinking like sustainability, and that's always been interesting to me. I mean, yeah, smart home for us has always been a cool amenity in the industry, but I think what kind of gets lost in that is, the ancillary impacts in a positive way on the environment, right? Like you mentioned the smart lighting, like how much energy are we wasting by just keeping lights on, right? Like if you just use that efficiency play with IoT to turn lights off, how much carbon could you reduce in the atmosphere? Like those are the things that excite me, that are sort of like those small elements that sort of build up, right? In sustainability, like the other one, I'll selfishly say too, like Rentley Power self-guided tours. So like one of the things that I like to think about is by having less people travel to homes in a car, how much carbon are you reducing? Right. And so like these little mini applications and like efficiency layers to IoT, like that really build up to big results. And I think the example you used about, healthcare is an even greater example of you literally have IoT that can save lives and have a positive impact on people in just by leveraging efficiency.
The parents could be monitoring the kid on an app on their device, and their child's at school, and they've got that ability to see what's happening, and so that peace of mind in that case. Yeah. So to me, your question, I think if you think about impact on people and the planet, those are two real great reasons to be excited. I think the third one probably would be exciting businesses like yours, or we have EV charging is an area where we're very strong, or like electric scooters, electric bikes, which again does fit into multiple categories on the sustainability side. But it's like new and emerging businesses that are basically being driven because IoT is there. There's bus safety businesses that are coming out of nowhere that is completely powered only by IoT. So without IoT, they don't even have a business. So these new emerging businesses that can be created, those would be probably the things that I'm most excited about. I mean, I think there's some technology things that are happening, but in terms of the actual, to your question about what am I excited about, is really the possibilities that IoT can bring, and that's very much those areas where we're focused.
The counterpoint to that is we talked about exciting applications. One of the things I'll cite as a challenge too has been, well, and this tends to be in real estate, right? Like there's a running joke in real estate, if you're a vendor, how do I win your business? Real estate or operator comes back to me. He says, oh, he or she says, stay around for 5 years. So the business moves slower, right? Than possibly the consumer space. It's B2B sales. It tends to have a longer sales cycle. They tend to not be attracted on shiny things. They're more about fundamentals, right? Like, hey, how is this impacting the resident? How is this having a positive impact on my business? So those are just business challenges just in general for real estate. I'm curious, like, you work in IoT, you work at a leading company. What are the next challenges that IoT in general has to overcome, would you say, in the next 5 to 10 years? Is it consumer psychology of adoption? Do you think it's technology limitations? Is it infrastructure?
I mean, I think that, if you look at 2030, there's talk about 90 billion plus connected devices. So that's a big number in the growth. So in the past, the growth has been, it's coming, and now I think we're seeing that it's here and it's accelerating. So I think seeing the demand materialize is probably one. I think in terms of technology, you've got the rise of satellite, and Starlink is a great one, where now all of a sudden, you could be using your text you're on a plane where there's no coverage, and there's the Starlink. So there's some disruption, which creates new opportunities, because basically we're looking at a way that connectivity can become more ubiquitous or completely available. And so I think that that's certainly exciting. To me, it's probably just most about being able to deliver as you kind of alluded to, some strong fundamentals as a business performance so that you can continue to kind of invest into. But there's new standards coming along. The eSIM has been historically slow take up. So the notion of you being able to make changes on the fly and not have to be introducing new SIM cards and so forth. There's new standards where you're able to more easily switch from carrier to carrier in terms of technology changes. So those are some exciting things. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but those are some of the things I'm thinking about.
Yeah, 90 billion. It's going to be interesting to see how our infrastructure supports it, right? Because I remember. God, I feel like I'm old on these podcasts. Like I remember the .com era, and I remember 2G, 3G to 4G to 5G transition, and I remember LoRa as a protocol being like the savior, and it's just interesting to
And
get your
these are all
take.
still relevant. So the thing we got to remember and what we talk to our customers about is, the newest technology is often the most expensive,
Yep.
right? So there is LoRaWAN, there may be something superior, but the price point could be slightly,
Right. Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
so what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, hey, now of course 2G, 3G had its time, whether it's 4G, LTE, 5G, maybe there's LoRaWAN, obviously you got satellite, which historically was way more expensive, but now there's some changes happening there. And companies particularly that deploy IoT at mass and scale, they don't want to be replacing, every 3 years. I mean, we have one customer where they're putting this device into an air compressor that goes into a factory that may not come out for 10 years.
Right.
Right? So the thought for them to go and have to swap that out all the time. So it's typically the newer technology could be for newer applications or the newest Rentley device,
Yep.
maybe.
You're 100% correct because that's one of the I wouldn't say the psychological items we have to overcome, which is a natural thing as a real estate operator goes, well, I don't want to install something that's going to be obsolete, right? And so that's where we're really, and I think we all are regimented about making sure that not only is the technology scalable, but that it's durable, right? That it's long lasting. I make the protocol joke because we started off utilizing Z-Wave, right? And it was the 300 series chipset, but we've always been sort of the Z-Wave connected device with a cellular backhaul. We've maintained that, and it's helped with that backwards compatibility conversation, right? Because that's the ultimate fear that our sector has is they don't want to do these mass changes and not know, and it's kind of to the earlier point, the 5-year rule, right? They want to know that it's going to last 5, 6, 7 years, right? They want to know it's still going to continue to be robust. And thank goodness it has been. And it's just one of those things you have to kind of challenge yourself to do as a tech operator too, not just chase the new thing, but make sure it's going to be sustainable. It's going to be around.
The other thing I would say is, to me, the combination of video and AI is really interesting, right? So video is potentially expensive, but if you have AI where you're then after the particular portion of the video that's most important, first of all, I think there's cost, there's some cost synergies where video costs can come down. But I think with the use of AI, whereby, I mean, there's a business I'm familiar with that, they capture the video and then they use AI where they're only after that one particular piece of video, which is, let's call it an incident that takes place.
Yeah.
And that actually crystallizes, in this case, their business model, which is,
Mm-hmm.
a traffic violation, for example.
Ah, okay.
Right. So if you were just streaming videos and passing video, I mean, it would just be too expensive. But in this case, you've got AI, which is, oh, when you capture monitor video, this is the piece that you're after, and then how can you use AI to be able to sort of best transmit and analyze that video content. And so there you go. It's a new business evolves because of technologies such as that. And I do believe that AI in an IoT setting, again, I'd be careful because I don't want to seem buzzword
Yeah.
compliant at the
Mm-hmm.
moment.
Buzzword
But to
compliant.
me,
That's good.
but these devices is ultimately, by collecting that information, what, how can that be best utilized to predict things and change on the fly? So the insulin one is a great intervention where based on the real-time information, you can, propagate a change, which is the pump. But in a Rently business or in other businesses, what if based on what's happening, it can trigger, sort of new events or different types of insights? And so I think AI and IoT is going to become, very big in the next 5 years. It's an area that we're kind of a big bet, if you want to say, that we're thinking about on our business, and we're thinking about it because our customers are asking us, right? We have all this data. We'd like to be making more informed decisions. We're being pushed for more productivity. We're also, it's interesting intersection in the business right now is businesses are being pushed for growth and productivity simultaneously. So,
you hit on such an interesting point with regards to AI, IoT applications and preventative, especially in real estate. I was on a conference call with some industry leaders maybe a week or two ago, and the question was asked about applications for smart home. Like, hey, how are people adopting it? How are people using it? And by the way, this is, just to set the stage, it's a mix of vendors and operators. And so when you're a vendor on that call, you try to let the operators lead because you don't want to come off as the sales guy who's just piping up. So the question was asked, like, how are people applying the technology? And the comment was made, well, smart home hasn't really changed in the past, let's say few years. And I think what the person was saying was, well, the devices haven't changed, right? In our space, smart locks, thermostats, cellular hub are sort of the gold standard with regards to what people deploy, right? It's just, those are the devices that the resident tends to resonate with, right? Those are the ones that tend to generate on a balance sheet a return for the operator, or they know how to amortize it and they know how to depreciate the asset. Like those are things that they know. So to them, the technology hasn't changed. But what's interesting is the applications have changed, right? So 5 years ago, the gold standard was, we are selling smart home as an amenity. The renters are going to love it, and they're going to, they're going to love it as an add-on package. And what I was trying to say in the meeting, without really coming off too salesy, but I don't know if it landed as well as I would have wanted it to, but what I was trying to say is the application of the technology has changed, meaning it's become more than a value add or an amenity. What we're actually seeing in this space now, which is really interesting, is you have a problem in our industry of squatters on vacant properties, right? Or fraud, right? Ever since COVID has happened, fraud has been on the rise. If you do self-guided touring on vacant properties, you have sort of this problem space is, how do you make sure you're letting the right people in? And so what's really fascinating to me, to kind of hone in on your point, is there's so many interesting things that operators are really doing with regards to, you have a smart property that essentially, to some degree, understands what's happening. And this kind of sounds odd saying this, but the house knows when it's unlocked, right? The house knows when certain elements are happening with the property. You can even take it to damage prevention, right? The property can know if a flood is there or a fire is there. And AI, there's really interesting applications in that space too, where, look, if you're a real estate operator and you're managing thousands and thousands of properties, how do you zone in, to your point, on those things that matter? And there's a real interesting use case there for AI and IoT. And that to me is really exciting, because it's taking the technology and layering more interesting applications of it that actually have more meaning than, well, the renter just benefits from a smart home, right? There's actually more proactive things that can be done with. And we're just sort of scratching the surface too. And it's really not about the technology. It's about the problems you're solving for, right? That to me is really interesting. And seeing that evolution in 10 years is pretty fascinating to me.
Oh, for sure, right? I mean, you're basically seeing where your technology, which was maybe designed for a particular use case, there's many use cases which maybe you didn't anticipate, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting hearing that from customer. And like, again, this is just scratching the surface. Like, who knows what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years with the same technology and now with generative AI and more AI applications. You've had a big journey. I think one of the things that I took from your story too is you have a pretty supportive family. Tell us how, your family has supported you through all this change in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the beginning, it's almost like my parents allowed me to be who I wanted to be and always encouraged me to chase my dreams. So it probably started there. I think, most recently with, my wife, I have three daughters. Um, I've taken on a role where daddy's not around as much anymore. And there's lots of demands on my time and many cases inconvenient times. But I've evolved in my parenting style has been to bring them on the journey with me. So in the past, maybe younger Ron would have been decompartmentalizing everything. Where now it's more transparent about everything, and then trying where I can to explain to them, what I'm doing, or some of our use cases or some of the challenges, and involve them in my own journey so that they're part of it versus it being daddy's away from work. And so I've kind of evolved that way. And then same with my wife. I mean, we've had a period where I didn't work for 2 years, based on some circumstances, and she took the heavy load. And so part of it is just family's a team sport, and we're there to support one another. And I think when we grew up, because two of our three kids were born in Hong Kong and we grew up overseas as a unit, we were always kind of like a unit together, and we went kind of everywhere together. And the joys and the exciting parts we did together, and then some of the not so great parts we were doing together. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I'm really happy where we are today. The one thing is, it's important that everybody has a passion and that they're interested in whatever it is. And we're fortunate right now, and at least in our immediate family. So my wife and three daughters, they all have things and they're all very different things that they're interested in and very passionate about. And then what they do is they try to share those with us. So we're all kind of sharing together, what that thing may be. So makes for interesting dinner conversations.
That's awesome. That's incredible. Ron, appreciate you being on. I usually give people 30 seconds to pitch whatever they want. Ron, anything you want the audience to take away, or anything new and exciting about Core, or any just parting words of wisdom you want to share?
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. I don't want to, pitch Core, other than, if you're interested in IoT, and you want to make a difference, get in touch with us. We're hiring. I guess that's the one ad. The bigger thing is just, chase your dreams, right? And it's amazing what is possible when you sort of set an intention to go in a direction. And that's kind of, for me, what life's really been about. So yeah, just want to kind of encourage people. There's lots of exciting and positive things happening in the world. There's obviously lots of challenges, but I think focus on a good attitude, being in a good mood, and looking for those opportunities. And yeah, I hope for those that listened or watched, they got something out of this.
Awesome, Ron. Thank you so much. Ron Totton, CEO of Core. I genuinely appreciate you being on the podcast. I also want to say the fact that you took the time to visit all your customers and really be that customer-centric, it's like well respected. Not many people do that. So appreciate you just being on this podcast, but also like taking that effort to touch base with your customers. And you just seem like a great person, and Core is a great company. And, thank you again for taking the time to be on here, despite my power outage. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, you've been great, and continued success to you guys, and look forward to more exciting things.
Well, that wraps up this week's OpsTalks. Thank you all viewers for listening. Ron here sharing his wisdom. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on OpsTalks. Thanks so much.